In general, where do you see actually distress? So we know that there were, questions about, for example, Blackstone and REITs. Does it change the way you structure and sell the product?
It doesn't really. And, as much as it's easy to take a shot at a competitor or someone who's in the same industry, they're actually doing exactly the right thing. They are paying the tuition for the industry to explain to investors that alternative has a cost. Alternative means you're going to get more return, but you're going to give up some amount of liquidity. And investors need the education to understand that the money they allocate to alternatives, whether they're alternative equity, alternative REITs, or alternative credit, is less liquid than in public markets.
But are there parts of that alternative market that you worry about for the next 12 to 18 months?
I don't really. I don't see the kinds of excess. So we had, if you go back to 2007, we had a period of excess. Far greater than what happened in this most recent excess. The excesses in 2007 were funded with leverage. The excesses in 2021 were funded with equity. So I believe that while we will have some amount of distress, I don't think the distress cycle will be anything like what we saw in 2008. And I think most of the pain is actually going to be borne by equity. I mean, let's face it. The best thing to have done for investors for the last decade, up until 22, was to have fired all the professional money managers, bought the S&P 500, bought the 30-year Treasury, and play golf, fish, or do whatever it is that people like to do. I don't think that's going to be the world going forward. I think that the world is going to be much more difficult to navigate for investors, and I think alternatives will play a much bigger part of it.
But for equity, this is in the short term. Are you expecting a big correction as we kind of adjust to higher rates?
I don't know that we've had a correction. Certainly the correction that's taken place has been mostly in growth because that's where most of the excesses were. But we've moved from a regime of hyper-liquidity to a regime of less liquidity, from low rates to higher rates. That is generally not a great time for equities, particularly if the Fed is also trying to cool the economy. And I'm not, again, I come back to, I look at the last decade as the anomaly. I look at where we are today as much closer to what I think normal is. Is liquidity abnormal today? No. Are prices abnormal? No. Are spreads abnormal? No. They're just abnormal as of the last decade because investors got so used to the hyper liquidity that was pumped into the system.